May 3rd. Evening. On the edge of the Carpathian Mountains. The sky was the color of dying embers when Jonathan Harker's carriage rattled into the village of Bistritz, a crooked little town where every house seemed to lean inward as though whispering secrets behind his back. He was a solicitor from England, traveling to meet an eccentric client, Count Dracula, in a castle far deeper into the mountains. A property deal. A simple business trip. But something in this place felt wrong. The innkeeper, a broad-shouldered man with sunken eyes, paused mid-pour when Jonathan showed him the letter from the Count. His hands trembled slightly. "You travel tomorrow?" the man asked, his voice rough with disbelief. "Yes. To the Borgo Pass. The Count's coach will meet me there at midnight," Jonathan replied, folding the letter neatly. A woman nearby dropped her glass. Shattered it. She crossed herself. "Do not go," she whispered. Later that night, as Jonathan packed, the same woman knocked on his door and handed him something. A small, worn crucifix. Her eyes pleaded with him. "For your mother's sake," she said. "For your soul." He chuckled politely, thanked her, and placed the crucifix in his pocket. A local superstition, he thought. Nothing more. But that night he heard howls outside his window. Not dogs. Not wolves. Something else. And when he finally closed his eyes to rest, he dreamt of a dark castle, gates that groaned open on their own, and a pale man with eyes like frozen water, waiting. The next day, the village seemed quieter, like it was holding its breath. Jonathan finished his breakfast under the cold stares of the inn staff. No one smiled. No one spoke. Only the ticking of the old wall clock kept him company. At precisely 7:30 p.m., he was dropped at the Borgo Pass. Just as the sun was bleeding into the jagged mountains, the driver tossed down his luggage and hurried off like he couldn't leave fast enough. Jonathan stood alone on the winding path, mist curling at his feet like fingers from the underworld. Then, through the thickening fog, he heard it, the sharp clatter of hooves. A black carriage burst through the mist, drawn by horses as pale as bone. The coachman was tall, cloaked entirely in black, his face hidden in shadow. But what Jonathan could see was the man's eyes. They were unblinking, too wide, too still. Without a word, the man grabbed Jonathan's bags like they weighed nothing and gestured him inside. The ride was fast. Far too fast for the winding, narrow roads. Trees clawed at the windows. Shapes moved in the darkness. And only once, Jonathan swore he saw another carriage just ahead, floating off the ground. But when he blinked, it was gone. The coachman never spoke. But when wolves howled nearby, he let out a sound Jonathan would never forget, a low, throaty growl. Deeper than any human voice could reach. And just like that, the wolves fell silent. Then, far in the distance, rising from a sheer cliff like a blackthorn, Castle Dracula appeared. And Jonathan realized he was about to meet the man who had summoned him here. And the man who would change his life forever. The carriage stopped with a violent jolt. Jonathan stepped out, his boots sinking slightly into gravel black as ash. Towering before him was Castle Dracula. Jagged towers and weather-beaten stone, silhouetted against the blood-colored moon. It didn't look abandoned, but it didn't look alive either. The door creaked open before he could knock. A tall figure stood in the archway, dressed in all black, pale as candle wax, eyes like glaciers. "Welcome to my home," the man said. His voice was low, smooth, with an accent that seemed stitched from several languages. "I am Dracula." He didn't reach for Jonathan's hand. Instead, he gestured silently and turned into the shadows of the corridor. Inside, the castle was lit by flickering lanterns and the occasional trembling candle. The walls were lined with faded tapestries and dust-choked portraits, their faces smeared by time. The air was cold, unnaturally so. And though the Count moved silently, the house felt like it was breathing. Dinner was served, but only Jonathan ate. Dracula merely watched, eyes fixed, unblinking, occasionally commenting on England in a tone that sounded rehearsed. When Jonathan mentioned the howling wolves from earlier, Dracula smiled faintly. "Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make." Jonathan tried to laugh politely, but something in the Count's expression told him this man meant it. As the night wore on, Dracula showed him to a guest room. "You may rest here. Explore freely," he said. "But some doors are not for guests. The Count bowed and vanished into the dark. And as Jonathan lay in bed, one chilling thought coiled in his mind. There were no servants, no staff, and no sound in the castle, except the slow thump of his own heartbeat. Morning came, but it was hard to tell. The castle had no windows that faced the sun. Just thick stone walls and heavy velvet drapes that drank in the light. Jonathan tried to keep himself busy, walking the long corridors lined with armor, faded portraits, and books written in languages he couldn't read. But everywhere he turned, doors were locked. Hallways ended in cold stone. Some stairs went down and never came up again. There were no footsteps but his own. At one point, he opened a door that groaned like it hadn't moved in years, and found a spiral staircase leading downward, disappearing into the dark like a throat. He almost went in. Almost. But then he heard something. Breathing. Not his own. He slammed the door shut. Later, during another silent meal, Jonathan mentioned how strange the layout of the castle seemed. Dracula's reply was flat. This castle has many memories. It was not built for comfort. When Jonathan asked about mail service, he wanted to send a letter back to London. Dracula's smile tightened. You may write all you wish, he said. I will see to the delivery. But Jonathan didn't feel reassured, especially not after he spotted ink on Dracula's sleeve. His own handwriting. That night, long after the castle had swallowed its last candle's flame, Jonathan tried one more locked door near his room. It didn't open, but something on the other side scratched back. Jonathan awoke to a strange stillness. Not silence, the castle was always silent, but a kind of pressure, like the air itself was watching him. He dressed and began his morning ritual. But as he reached for his shaving mirror, he froze. Dracula was standing directly behind him. Jonathan hadn't heard the door open. Not even a whisper of footsteps. But there he was, so close he should have been visible in the glass. Except he wasn't. The mirror reflected only Jonathan. Startled, he dropped the glass. It shattered against the stone floor. Dracula didn't flinch. I'm sorry, Jonathan stammered. I didn't hear you come in. Dracula's voice was smooth, but his eyes were cold. It is of no matter. Mirrors are unnecessary things. He swept out of the room with a swirl of black, leaving Jonathan to gather the broken shards, hands trembling. He tried to laugh it off. Maybe the angle was wrong. Maybe it was a trick of light. But the truth was already inside him, gnawing. That evening, as the shadows thickened, Jonathan explored again. This time he found a small study, and something tucked behind a stack of old Latin texts. A journal. Not his. The writing inside was erratic. Smudged. Written by someone clearly frightened. The last legible line read, I am not alone in this castle, and whatever watches me was never alive to begin with. Jonathan couldn't sleep that night. The walls creaked with strange rhythm. Whispers faint like wind through rotted leaves drifted beneath his door. And sometimes something scratched at the wood, not violently but slowly, like it wanted him to know it was there. Just after midnight, the castle went utterly still. That's when Jonathan did something he swore he wouldn't. He left his room and turned the handle on the one door he had feared the most. The one he had heard scratching behind. This time it opened. The air inside was thick and sour, like old blood and damp stone. He stepped forward, holding only a candle which flickered nervously in his grip. The room wasn't empty. 3 women stood against the far wall, pale as frost, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They were beautiful, impossibly beautiful. But their smiles were sharp. You shouldn't be here, one of them whispered. Before he could move, they were on him. Breath cold, hands like silk and bone. One leaned close to his throat, and Jonathan couldn't scream. Couldn't even blink. Then suddenly Dracula was there. He didn't walk in. He appeared like a shadow, remembering it had shape. Back! He roared, and the women hissed, slinking into the dark like smoke curling backward. Jonathan collapsed, gasping. Dracula didn't offer help, just stared. You are mine, the Count said softly. No one touches you, yet. And with that he turned and disappeared into the black once more. Jonathan no longer trusted the daylight. He hadn't seen the sun in days, only pale light through the courtyard that never changed, never shifted. His meals appeared when he wasn't looking. Doors opened and closed themselves. The castle was more than haunted, it was awake. Determined to reach someone, anyone, Jonathan began writing letters in secret. Not just to Mina, his fiancée back in England, but to the British Embassy, his firm in London, even to the local magistrate. He hid them in the lining of his coat. One night, when Dracula appeared unexpectedly in his chamber, Jonathan clumsily tucked his coat behind a chair. The Count noticed. "You're writing more?" he asked, tone unreadable. "Just thoughts," Jonathan lied. "To stay sane." Dracula tilted his head. "Good. Sanity is a precious thing. Easy to misplace in such old places." The next morning his coat was gone. In its place, folded neatly on the chair, were the letters. All of them, unsealed, unsent, and every signature had been carefully removed with a blade. Jonathan stared at the empty spaces where his name had once been. Later that day, he tried to climb the outer wall of the castle using bedsheets and iron rods from the window frame. He didn't get far, the stone was wet and impossibly smooth. But as he looked out over the endless forest, something occurred to him. There were no roads leading to the castle. Not one. Just wilderness and wolves. Jonathan had stopped sleeping. Every night brought strange whispers from the walls, pale faces at his door, and the echo of footsteps in halls that shouldn't exist. The castle no longer pretended to be a home. It was a trap. One evening, after pretending to sleep, he watched Dracula crawl down the castle wall like a lizard, face first, hands gripping stone like claws. There was no sound, no gravity, just hunger in motion. Jonathan knew then, this was no man, no eccentric noble. He was something ancient, something cursed, and Jonathan had to get out. That night, during a thunderstorm, he made his move. He took a knife from the kitchen, wrapped what little food he could find, and crept to the forbidden stairway, the one that led down. It was darker than he expected, and colder. He passed doors that breathed behind him, empty cells, a crypt with names scratched off stone. And then he saw it, an open gate leading to a narrow tunnel carved into rock. He ran. For the first time in weeks he ran. But as he neared the light, a flicker of moon beyond the tunnel's mouth, he felt something behind him. Not footsteps. Not breathing. Just a presence. He turned. Nothing there. He turned back. Dracula stood in front of him. "You almost made it," he whispered, fangs barely visible beneath a smile. "But this place remembers everyone who enters. And it doesn't forget." Jonathan screamed. And the castle, old, hungry, eternal, closed its gates once more.